You just have it all.
Alrighty, so we're going to be talking about violent political rhetoric. And here I'm going to read out the question right here. And it says, should the First Amendment free speech clause be interpreted to more strictly ban politically violent rhetoric, such as calls for insurrection or rebellion and violence against minorities? And then it says, as a way to focus your conversation, you may find examples in the media of such rhetoric. What do you think about that?
Well, I haven't really heard in the media. But, yeah, I think that there should be like a ban on this politically violent behavior, because I feel like that kind of relates to verbal assault. And if verbal assault's illegal, then why is this illegal? Inciting violence and stuff like that.
I feel like even verbal assault, though, it's pretty muddy, Like,
oh yeah, it does. There's definitely gray area.
Like you can literally go out and wear really offensive speech, and it's totally legal to wear I can literally walk out there with the N-word.
I think it's different
on my jacket.
That's different.
And that wouldn't actually be hate speech technically, or actually it could be interpreted as hate speech, but more like it's not directed at anybody. It's more I'm just I'm expressing myself. But I think that definitely. I don't know about politically violent rhetoric. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like you definitely, if it's involving someone else's campaign, you should be able to express your political beliefs.
Well, I guess what I mean by politically is it Democrat, Republican, or is it more social things? People say, oh, don't get too political. I mean, just don't talk about a big topic. You know what I mean? So for example, politically violent rhetoric would be like KKK stuff. That's kind of like a political movement in a way, sort of, not really. Or
right, exactly.
You know what I mean?
Well, I think that it's interesting because I do think that there should be bans. The First Amendment should be able to more strictly regulate speech involving, stuff that incites violence, stuff that incites chaos, and it's meant to breed disorder in a sense. I feel like that definitely should be regulated. Especially, you look at what the insurrection on January 6th, that was definitely, you can't have stuff like that happening. That stuff has to be regulated. You cannot just break into the Capitol building like that,
I do think that even though I don't feel like Trump. Do you think Trump directly wanted that to happen? Because I don't think he did.
Look, here's the thing. If you really look at the stuff, he definitely did. I mean, I watched so many things.
What's the end goal, though? You know what I mean?
The end goal was he was actually legitimately hoping. Think about this. We're not going to get into this right now. All right. The bottom line is, we're not going to talk about this at all. We can talk about this after.
Okay.
I think that in those cases, it definitely should be. It should not be protected by the First Amendment. If you're going to incite violence, especially if you're a figure you're a figure with a lot of power over others, a lot of influence. So it comes down to inflicting violence upon minorities. When Trump says, "Hey, look at, attack and grab them wherever you see them," if Trump were to say that, which he kind of did.
He didn't.
I mean,
that's debatable. You probably know more than I do.
Look, I'm just saying that if someone were with a lot of influence over other people's lives were to say something like that, it might have some serious implications. I think that should not be regulated.
I feel like if you're using Trump as an example, I think he more indirectly did it. I don't think he directly said it. It was more indirect. Some things.
I think the intent was clear.
Dog whistle.
You know what I mean? There's not really any other way to put it. I mean, the intent was pretty obvious. That he wanted to get these people riled up.
Yeah.
And he wanted them to storm the Capitol. He wanted them to.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, if you go listen to the speech, I mean, he basically flat out said.
Oh yeah, I heard the speech. It's pretty. It walks the line, definitely.
I do think it raises a really important question of, what kind of speech can be banned. What kind of speech should be regulated? Where should we draw the line? A good example is cross burning, where it's are all acts of cross burning, should they all be considered an act of intimidation? You know what I mean, against black people, and basically is who it would be targeted towards. And there is grounds to say that it is due to its symbolic history as a symbol of oppression and basically, if you were burning a cross,
Mm.
it meant you were going to basically. It was the first step in a lynch,
Yeah, yeah,
So it did have some. It does have some serious, racial history to it.
yeah, yeah. I mean, let's go back to the prompt. What about stuff that calls for insurrection? What do you think about that? I think that as of right now, I think it should be like illegal, like rightfully so. But if it was like a totalitarian state, it'd still be considered illegal. But I think it'd be the right thing to do. But I think to call for insurrection at this point in time would be like bad. Not like burn down the system, but like we're going to assassinate so and so, and like we're going to organize to overthrow this at this point. I think that should be considered
Right.
illegal.
I think that when you can't really storm the Capitol and take hostages. That's not,
Yeah,
and especially when it's on the grounds that the elections were fraudulent, when there's literally no legitimate basis to
yeah,
say such a thing. Seriously,
yeah,
there's no credible source that would give any grounds to say that.
yeah. No,
So it's based on that. It's basically it's based on lies, and
yeah.
I definitely think that there should be a line drawn there. But I also think there should be. You can look at it from another point of view.
Mm.
I know that this is pre-Civil War. I don't know the exact dates, um, but abolitionists from the North, like they were starting to emerge, abolitionist speech. So
Yeah.
like anti-slavery, they were starting to send mail to southern states to basically, say that slavery is wrong.
Mm.
And governors of those states attempted to ban the speech entirely. They say, you cannot do this because it is an attempt to incite an insurrection through the slaves, basically. You're
Mm.
trying to get them to rise up and fight back. And they're saying that, you can't do that. So they tried to outlaw that speech
Yeah.
entirely. And
Yeah.
it was actually it was basically a method to silence
Yeah.
speech against slavery. So it's like, can you regulate it in that sense? Can you basically use it as a political weapon to maintain a flawed structure?
Yeah, yeah, I see what you mean.
You see
At
what I'm
some
saying? Or a
point,
flawed institution?
yeah, I feel like there's a different line at which that's drawn. You know what I mean?
Right,
Like it's hard to
exactly.
tell what that is. Like for slavery, yeah, it's wrong what they're doing. Like banning that insurrection type speech. But for like right now, we're kind of we might be near. We're kind of in the middle. You know what I mean? Like we're not nearing like leaning either way.
Right. Right.
It's hard to explain like what I'm trying to say, but
like for something like this, it was a little different.
yeah,
Like the
I
context
feel
was
like
very
I feel
different.
like we're not under something like that anymore.
But I mean, it kind of falls into like we have to establish what's right and what's
Yeah, right.
wrong
Yeah.
and what institutions are flawed, and that
Mm.
kind of involves a general consensus, and uh, so I think that when it comes to that, but it's like, yeah, it's just tough to determine when something like when an insurrection would be something that is. I mean, obviously, it would never be protected. You know what I mean? Like a violent
Yeah.
overthrow.
But then I think the founding fathers had in mind that like, yeah, we know that governments and like things of power can get to be too much. So like, I think that's why they kind of have free speech
Yeah.
already as a thing. I think they understand that, and that's why they gave the Second Amendment as well. I'm not like super pro gun or anything, but you know what I mean. Like that's why they did it. They had that so you could overthrow the government, but they didn't know at that time just how advanced and like how much more powerful they're gonna
Right.
get.
No one could have predicted this.
Yeah,
You know. And
but you know what I mean. It's there for a reason.
it's there, right?
Yeah.
It is there for a reason, and I don't think that I think that a constitution should be somewhat flexible. It should evolve and change over time, and
Mm.
but I do think that they did maybe foresee something like this occurring. But in any case, back on topic. Let's go back to the prompt real quick.
Yeah, we get off topic.
Yeah, we did kind of a little bit.
Violence against minorities. I feel like we mostly agree that if it's calling for violence against people, we understand that under different like circumstances can an insurrection, be like viable. What else?
Right. So it's like when you talk about just violence against minorities, it could be violence against any group. Like
Yeah,
it could be. I mean, basically any speech that is used to incite violence
yeah.
should be
Not even
susceptible to
minorities.
regulation.
Just like anybody, really.
Right.
That's just a part of it. No, that's just a part
That
of
is
it.
just a part of it, but I do
Yeah.
think that, I mean, that's pretty. We can establish that
I think it goes without
speech.
saying that it goes for everyone.
There's some speech that should be regulated.
Yeah,
That should be
for sure.
susceptible to First Amendment regulation.
Hmm.
Uh, I'm not entirely sure about um, the media portion of this.
That's I was
As a
waiting
way
for
to
that
focus your
next.
conversation, you may find examples in the media of such
I
rhetoric.
guess it's just in the news. That's what it would mean, you know.
Yeah, that's true.
Uh, but I haven't heard like people talk about that,
I mean, it has
like
kind
this
of crossed
prop
my mind a
itself.
little bit, where it's like, where does the media stand on such a
More
thing,
so,
on
I
an
thought more of
insurrection?
that in like 2016 and stuff. When stuff was more like the whole like kind of cancel culture was kind of new.
Yeah, it is kind of a newer thing.
So that's I think it had exploded way more and was talked about more then. Because people were like, "Oh, what's next? You're gonna ban like free speech and stuff like that," and like people were just like becoming a bit scared about like free speech. But obviously, you can still have free speech. It's just that
Yeah, I don't
sometimes
think
you're gonna have
that.
more outrage from
I do
people.
think that there's legitimate concerns that it can be used as a political weapon to undermine your opposition and
Yeah,
maintain flawed institutions that benefit you and your buddies. But I also think that I don't think that it'll ever truly be overtaken in a sense.
what do you mean? All these free the First Amendment?
Right, like a lot of our free speech and our expression, I feel like we can more somewhat clearly draw a line.
It's hard to draw that line.
It can be.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right,
Okay, that was
we can
it.
probably wrap it up now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we covered just about everything. All right.